Welcome back to segment 2 here at Plane Time in Orlando, Florida. And we're going to switch gears just a little bit. And we got the foundation and what makes Michael Jannine, but we're going to talk about airworthiness documentation. And this is a very close and dear to a lot of people's hearts. Other folks don't have a clue what we're talking about when you use the term conformity. But Michael, tell us what you have learned about both the conformity aspect, certification, regulation, registrations, all the requirements that our government and our system has. But we have the safest system in the world. A lot of people try to emulate the FAA system, and a lot of people use it.
Yes.
It's the best that we have to deal with, but it's very intricate, and you have learned through your career of how important it is to not only understand the interpretation of the regulation, but how to actually implement it and make it work. And again, you get down to the end result. And did it work? Did they accept it? Was there any problem when you export an aircraft or when you import an aircraft? Just share with us your thoughts on that.
All right. Whenever, as a designated airworthiness rep, whenever I had to do a certification project, everything starts for the airplane with the type certificate data sheets. You do the type certificate data sheets, and you have to go back and use that as your reference point to verify that the aircraft conforms to the type certificate data sheet. And then after that, you go looking for supplemental type certificates.
But now, okay, talk to us, type certificate data sheet. What would they find? What does a type certificate data sheet consist of?
The required equipment. You have to have a list of required equipment based on options that are installed at the manufacturer's facility when the aircraft is certified, when originally built. And you go back to seeing what the aircraft was built under a production certificate or individually, and then you go back to see the airplane and the records after you review your data sheets and your certificate data sheets, your supplemental type certificates. You go back to the aircraft records to see if anything has changed or been modified or removed from that standard. Mm-hmm. And then you have to go and verify on the actual aircraft whether it's still there or it's not there. Mm. And that's just the start of it. And then there's the records review. The records review for the continuing airworthiness maintenance part of it, or they call it CAMI nowadays. And the records review started day one, and they have to be continuous to the present date. No time lapses, no math errors, as we talked about earlier.
Have you found much of that in what we have to deal with our system now, as far as things that don't add up, or you lost time?
There are some math errors that are involved, but the biggest thing is nowadays is you see a lot of airplanes that have had the same maintenance issue 3, 4, 5 times in the last 3 or 4 years, or over a certain period of time, where people have just swapped the item out instead of looking for the root cause of the problem. Mm. And after 4 or 5 times, these parts get expensive. And but the guy's supervisor or whatever in the shop, doesn't matter if it's a small guy, one guy shop, or largest MRO in America. They just swap the part out, and they don't look for the root cause of the problem. So they're doing it again in 6 months.
So now you're talking troubleshooting in the field, and how you're trying to find that as a representative of the administrator to make sure that it meets its type design. And
right, because all the parts that are installed have to meet the standards, and the standards involve the certificate of compliance, the 8130-3 forms, if they're made in America.
Michael, is this hard to do or difficult to do?
It's time consuming. It's very time consuming. It's has a repetitive nature to it, but it's mostly time consuming if you want to be accurate, and accuracy is important in aviation. You have to be accurate, and you have to be correct with all of this and all of your records. And then the maintenance has to be correct. You can have maintenance, but it doesn't mean it's correct.
That's
That's a
true.
slippery slope.
uh, if we had if I'm at the airport and I'm looking at a Beechcraft King Air 200,
Okay.
and it may look like a Beechcraft King Air B200. It may feel like a Beechcraft B200, but it may not be a Beechcraft King Air B200. Conformity. This is where
Well-
I really respect and appreciate
What?
your position of having to conform an aircraft to its type certificate.
I have actually seen data plates not in the original position by people who performed maintenance and didn't know where the data plates went and just stuck the data plate where they thought it should be.
So it doesn't conform.
No, the data plates go where the manufacturers placed it. And they're different on each manufacturer has their own given specific location based on the model where they're going to place the data plate.
And let me just introduce this concept of anarchy in aviation. If an aircraft left the factory and it met its blueprints, its drawing, its type design,
Yes.
but it gets out to different aircraft, they go all over the world, and it gets someplace and somebody has a better idea, I can make that work better. So they modify it. And then it goes to some other airport 5 or 10 years later. And, this was kind of a dumb idea. Why don't we do it this way? By the time it gets to an import-export, someone with knowledge goes to look at it that knows what this Beechcraft B200 is supposed to be, look like, and it doesn't conform. So, I mean, we're talking about not one or two aircraft. We're talking about thousands of aircraft. And in theory, if you're able to go out and an aircraft that's 30 years old should kind of look kind of like it did when it was 1 day old. Is that?
That's where you go back to your type certificate data sheet and your required equipment. Any change from the required equipment has to be approved. And the approval processes vary depending on what country the aircraft is registered. In America, it's done by STC.
STC being?
The supplemental type certificate or the major alterations, the 337s. And if you've done your work and you've got it approved and you've documented it and it's entered in the logbooks correctly, then you're all set. But if it's not entered correctly or if it's not documented, then you have to go back to square one or you have to remove what was installed.
And put it back the way that it should have been.
Correct. That's the only way it's going to meet the requirements for a certificate.
But Michael, that's going to be too expensive. As an aircraft owner, I can't afford to put it back like that. What do we do?
There's a lot of scrapyards in Arizona.
It does get down to that point sometimes, and it probably hurts you.
Well, the first thing that goes when the money runs out for a lot of these owners is the maintenance. That's the sad, hard truth. The first thing that goes on a lot of aircraft, small, medium, or large, is the maintenance. And it's not hard to figure out after a while.
And you know where the skeletons are, you know where to look, and again, this is where you go back to experience and what you have learned, and like you say, you know where to look.
Yes.
If you approach an aircraft, what's the largest aircraft that you have had to conform? What most complex? Transport category?
Yeah, it was a transport category. It was an old 737. It was going to be imported back to America, and it was pretty good. It was a VIP use aircraft type deal. I want to say it was a presidential aircraft coming back to America from a previous country, and it still didn't meet the regulations.
So what was the end result?
A very expensive modification to return it to a standard transport category. It doesn't matter if it's a cargo plane or a presidential aircraft. If it doesn't meet the type certificate data sheet, it doesn't meet the requirements.
Michael, that sounds pretty hard-nosed as far as, but it flew in here fine. It's a great flying aircraft. It's got low time. You're telling me that it doesn't meet a certain standard?
It doesn't have the required equipment in it. No, it doesn't.
So you're not going to let me fly my airplane?
Absolutely not.
I'm going to fly it anyway.
I'm not the enforcement.
Not with my blessing, you're not.
Yeah,
And
I'm not the enforcement. But if you want a certificate, you have to meet the requirements.
And it's all so important. And that's why I'm trying to pull out just how important it is to meet a standard.
Right.
And you know, we've
These
used
standards are established for a reason, and it's been tried and true. Like you said before, we have the best aviation safety system in the world, and it's that way because of past experiences in aviation, and that's usually what drives all our regulations. And by having that past experience, we've developed the safest system around. And in order to continue, would you want that airplane flying over your house?
not really. No.
No. That's what it comes down to.
And that's where again we've got the real challenge to keep the system as intact as possible.
Yeah.
And through dedication, folks like yourself, where you're sworn to, you're a representative of the administrator, and you have got to keep it pure, or else our system goes into anarchy. And there's some countries that they have let those standards slip, and I don't know that the aircraft are really safe to fly in. Have you been into countries that you really didn't feel comfortable getting on an airplane?
One or two that'll remain nameless.
Okay.
Yes.
But it still happens.
Yeah, and they're not in continents you'd think of.
Hmm.
You know,
And-
you have to be really aware of where you're flying and what you're flying in, and
Wow.
who's flying it.
Well, and some people will ask me, knowing that I've been in the industry for a while, I'm going on Umpty Ump Airlines. Umpty Ump Airlines, do you feel comfortable flying Umpty Ump Airlines? Not really. Not really, because I know that I've read that there has been some safety concerns. You pay your money, you take your chances.
Well,
And
if you're in the industry long enough, you get an idea of who's reputable and who's reliable and which one you want to be on, and that's basically how I make my travel choices, not by who's got the lowest price for the seat.
And that's a good takeaway. It really is, because it's again, if without folks to your discipline and your dedication, our system falls apart, and we have anarchy. We can't have anarchy. We've got to do a better job at that. And with that, Michael, we're going to switch off and come to our third segment, but we're going to send this one off,
Okay.
And we're going to get back into it at our third segment, Plane Time.